for us in Center. We just happen to be fortunate enough to have a set of dollars to tap into to do that with during this time, which will soon be going away. But there's other places that don't. You know, if my kids are at grade level, I can get it done in a 165-day calendar. If my kids are not in grade level, I'm not going to be able to pull that off, and it's going to take more resources. That's why the categorical.
So, Bill, clarify for me, when you say categorical, do you mean the categorical pot, or are you talking about?
And again, this is more just a thought experiment than anything profound, because we wrestled in previous discussions about how much of the problems we're trying to solve could be solved through just a higher base versus through the categorical pot. Is there anything from the negative factor that, because essentially that's created a world in which more and more of the dollars are simply coming through the base. And the answer may be no. This has just been a survival mode and nothing learned. It is a thought experiment in our overall discussion.
Yeah, I mean, there are folks from legislative services here who will correct me, but I think the message on the categoricals is without, and in fact, I think this came up when we were here 2 times ago, absent a change in state law, as I understand it, Amendment 23 covers the categoricals in total, so they'll increase in the same manner as the base. So I think that to answer your question, and not meaning this flippantly, the answer is, are you talking post in Amendment 23 or something that's in an accompaniment to that? Because at this point, if all you're doing is saying, okay, here's the total revenue pot, and it's just being divided between that which is covered by Amendment 23, you're essentially taking the categoricals and the base and throwing them together. And at that point, all I would say to the state, if there's a message, is don't overprescribe how it is we use these dollars, because our view of the future, especially if we go out into any time, is going to be imperfect. The challenge with the restriction on dollars is that, or said the other way, the intentional expression of those dollars, there's a lot of factors that go into how it is if you're in a small district or a large district, whether you're urban or rural or mountain or front range, western slope. You need to have some flexibility for making a determination as to what's the most impactful use of those dollars within your own respective community.
I just want to make a comment that, and I would really defer this more to the instructional leaders here rather than us accountants, but to me, the negative factor is just a mechanism that the state used to balance the budget. And to dwell on that, it maybe isn't the most productive thing. What to me is important is we're at a point now where we kind of know what it takes to improve student achievement. And from my naive perspective as an accountant, I would say, we need more time on contact with kids. We need to help teachers be better teachers, and we need intervention strategies that help those kids that are behind. And without oversimplifying it, which I know that's probably a gross oversimplification, those are the 3 things that we desperately need, and yet as we take away resources, whether it be the negative factor or any other mechanism, those are the kind of the first things that tend to get cut because they're more variable than a fixed cost. We can't easily close schools. We try, but it takes a lot of time and community process and effort to do that. We can't easily cut staff, and so it's those variable programs that are variable costs that are much easier for us to cut, and yet they're probably the things that really make the difference for kids.
That's great. And I think there's a hand up over here. What did I see? Any last comments?
Yeah, I want to say one comment. Amen, Glenn.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for a kind of a very personal account of how districts have had to accommodate this issue, and clearly a major factor in the consideration of the overall revenue needed. So, round of applause for our presenters so far. Thank you, George and David.
We are going to turn now to the question of full-day kindergarten and ECE funding with Melissa and Nan joining us up at the panel. And again, we'll hear from Todd as well on the policy side.
Well, good afternoon. We appreciate the opportunity to contribute to your conversation today regarding early learning and the school finance question around that. I'll just be introducing Nan Bandania, who oversees our Colorado preschool program. But one of the things that I just wanted to say at the very beginning is that we know that getting a good start in school matters, and that we can close achievement gaps early, and the Colorado preschool program is a good example of this. So we're really pleased to be able to share with you the results that CPP gets and some of the reasons why we see those results. And I believe that following our presentation that Todd will come up and talk more about the finance portions of that. So what I'll do is go ahead and introduce Nan Bandania, who is our supervisor of the Colorado preschool program.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. If I can get situated here. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you about the Colorado preschool program today. The first thing I want to do is just talk a little bit about access to preschool in general in Colorado. The pie charts that you see before you show the percentage of total population of 3- and 4-year-olds that have access to either the Colorado preschool program, Head Start programs, or preschool special education programs in our state. And you see the large gray areas for both 3- and 4-year-olds, and categorized as other or none. And I just want to clarify that that means that the child in this count may be at home with family. The child may be in a child care center or a private preschool. So the color wedges that you see of the pies really represent publicly funded preschool programs. So CPP, or Colorado Preschool Program at a glance. Right now we are authorized to serve 20,160 children. Colorado Preschool Program has been around since 1988, and we have served over 231,000 children since the program's inception. School district participation in the Colorado Preschool Program is voluntary. As of now, we have 170 school districts plus the Charter School Institute participating in the Colorado Preschool Program. CPP is funded through the school finance formula. Children in preschool generally are counted at 0.5 PPR, or per pupil revenue, so they attend preschool half-time. We do have a small provision to serve some children who have very, very high needs, as documented through their eligibility factors, to serve them full-time using 2 slots for 1 child. Our average funding right now for preschool, for the Colorado Preschool Program per child is $3,300 per slot. And right now, currently, we rank 36 in the country for state investment in preschool funding. So where are the Colorado Preschool Programs served? Every school district who participates has an appointed CPP Advisory Council, and that Advisory Council determines the community partners who will participate and how many children will be served in district preschools, how many children out in the community, and how many children within the Head Start programs locally. The Colorado Preschool Program legislation really talks a lot about the investment in quality. The results that we see nationally for preschool are tied to quality indicators. Quality preschool makes a difference. Class size for the Colorado Preschool Program is limited to 16 children. Low adult-child ratios, 1 to 8. We use the Colorado Quality Standards, which are program standards, to monitor and plan improvements, continuous improvements in the Colorado Preschool Program. Also, a very important quality factor that we understand more now than ever is the importance of aligned standards, birth through 12th grade, birth through 20, early learning and development guidelines that help us understand what very young children should know and be able to do. We also invest in assessment, in progress monitoring assessment to help us understand how children in CPP are doing and how to plan instruction to effectively support their development over time. Teachers in the Colorado Preschool Program who serve children funded through this initiative have funded time for instructional planning and assessment as well as home visitation. Families who receive support through the Colorado Preschool Program are expected to participate in the program through volunteer activities, parent education activities. Teachers also are expected to have preparation in early child development, early childhood education, and skills in family engagement. So we have a little competition out there. What are the lasting effects of this investment that our state makes? What are the lasting effects that our state makes in the investment in the Colorado Preschool Program? For one thing, we know, based on our assessment results, we know that children who have been part of the Colorado Preschool Program have a faster growth rate than their peers. So their peers who are more advantaged based on their family's ability to pay for preschool, the children in the Colorado Preschool Program, actually, we have a lot of data to show that they're closing the achievement gap. So that growth trajectory is on a steeper slope than what we would expect. We know that children funded through the Colorado Preschool Program are more likely to be at or above grade level in literacy in kindergarten through 3rd grade. And we have data to show that more children are shown at proficient or advanced in the 3rd through 5th grade statewide assessments than other at-risk children who did not have the benefit of the Colorado Preschool Program. We also have multiple years of data to show remarkable reduction in retention rates, up to half the rate of retention at kindergarten. So I brought just a little bit of data to share with you, and this data is from 2 of our assessment systems used in our preschool programs across the state. And so what you see is the creative curriculum developmental continuum on one side and the high scope core, which is another one of our assessments on the right side. And the dashed line represent the group of children that we consider to be more advantaged peers. And the blue line represents the Colorado Preschool Program children. And you see the data represented here goes from fall to spring. So we see the difference in the growth trajectory from fall to spring, and we can actually demonstrate through our test scores that we are in fact either narrowing or closing the achievement gap. This is for social and emotional development. We actually see children in the Colorado Preschool Program surpass their typical peers in physical development by the end of the school year. We see the gap closing in language and literacy, in math and science. And then when we follow a cohort of children, now through 6th grade, we're just putting our 7th grade data together right now. We see that if you look at CBP as the orange bars in this graph, compared to state overall, and then the blue representing children who have met the same kinds of at-risk factors, but did not have the benefit of CPP. So you see across reading, writing, and math that our children who have had the benefit of the Colorado Preschool Program fare very well compared to their peers who did not have that advantage. These are results from the Colorado Basic Literacy Act demonstrating the gap between, again, the group of at-risk children who met the same kinds of criteria but did not have the benefit of quality preschool programming, and those who did. And this graph shows the difference between children who had the benefit of CPP for 1 year, the yellow bar, and 2 years, the blue bar. Finally, when we look at widely held expectations for the age group across developmental and academic domains, we look at how young children are faring against what the national expectations are for 4-year-olds and what the normed data tells us about 4-year-olds. We see that across social, physical, language, cognitive, literacy, and mathematics there across the bottom, in each set above those we have data from fall to spring. And this is 3 groups of the funded children in the state preschool program, as well as in Head Start. So what you see is the yellow bar represents CPP, the purple bar, children who participated in Head Start, and the blue bar, children who are identified with disabilities. So you see the growth from fall to spring in each of those domains. And this actually is a new table that we are using to show that we can actually find the same results when we control for home language. So we see the same growth rates for children, very strong growth rates for children whose home language is something other than English, compared to our English speaking children. So that was a really whirlwind tour.
Yeah, there's one working mic, sir.
Thank you so much, Dan. And now we wanted to bring Todd back up to just give us a little bit of a kind of a legislative and legal perspective on the early childhood world in Colorado.
Give me 1 second here. So the question that was posed to me by Senator Johnston's staff was to look at what would it cost to provide additional funding for the Colorado preschool program and for full-day kindergarten. And there were a couple of different scenarios there that they asked me to look at. One, what would it cost to provide full-day preschool for all at-risk 4-year-olds? So that was one. The second one was, how much would it cost to provide half-day preschool for all at-risk 3-year-olds? And then how much would it cost to provide full-day kindergarten for all students within the system? So I've divided up this presentation to talk first about the preschool cost. And I think it's probably important to note at the beginning that we're talking about within the current school finance framework, how much that would cost. So, you know, if you were to change that framework in a different way, you're going to get a different result. So this is within the current school finance framework, how much would it cost to provide additional slots for these 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds and so on. One of the things I guess I wanted to just touch on that I don't think Nan got to was just the eligibility criteria in the current CPP program. It's within the statutes, there are certain requirements to participate, and it covers, you know, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds who are at risk of failing academically, and you know, I think that within the statute it talks about they lack overall learning readiness due to significant family risk factors, which are defined in the statute, need for language development skills, or they receive child welfare services. And the last point I put down here is there are various significant family risk factors that are defined in the statute that either 4-year-olds or 3-year-olds have to meet. One of them is being eligible for free or reduced lunch, and that's by far the biggest one. But there are other family risk factors that are identified of having an abusive parent, or a parent who hasn't completed high school,
or there's drug or alcohol abuse in the family. And there are other ones as well that are listed in the statute. So I just wanted to be clear that I'm operating under the assumption that this is how at-risk students are defined. One thing here Nan had mentioned as well is the number of CPP slots is set in the statute within the current school finance formula. It's currently just over 20,000, as she mentioned. The program started in '88, so I was just trying to show a little bit of history. It started out as a pilot program that the legislature started, and funding for it has increased over time, as you can see. There was a dip in the first recession during the 2000, 2001. I don't know if that was the reason for that, but there's a correlation there. And then you can see in the last several years, the funding, or the number of slots, has remained steady at 20,160. So, as Nan mentioned before, funding for the CPP is contained within the School Finance Act. All of those slots are funded at half-time, although 5% of the slots can be used for full-day preschool programs currently. She mentioned 170 out of 100, most school districts participate, including the CSI. And overall, right now, in the current budget year, we estimate that the cost of CPP is about $59 million after the negative factor. So that's taking into account that 16% reduction. So the question then is how much would it cost to provide full-day preschool for all at-risk 4-year-olds and half-day preschool for all at-risk 3-year-old children? And what I did is I tried to follow a method that CDE had used before, I think in response to the same type of question from the Joint Budget Committee last year. And so we got some demographic information. Hopefully this is something that folks can read. And I can just kind of quickly walk through these numbers. It starts with sort of the overall population of 3- and 4-year-olds is around 70,000. Multiplying that times the percentage of kids that qualify for free or reduced lunch, which is just under 45%. So row 3 shows sort of the total pool of 3- and 4-year-olds that might qualify under that criterion. Row 4 then adds back in an estimate of kids who might qualify being at risk for some of those other factors. Having a parent who hasn't completed a high school education, or having drug or alcohol abuse in the family, and so on. And that's based on the current ratio within the CPP program, that about 80% of their kids qualify based on free and reduced lunch, and the other 20% qualify based on one of those other at-risk factors. So adding those two together gives us our overall pool that would be eligible for this funding scenario. 39,000 4-year-olds, a little over 34,000 3-year-olds. And then what I tried to do is subtract out how many of those kids are currently funded, either through the CPP or through the Head Start program. So in rows 6 and 7, I'm subtracting out the kids that are currently funded. The one thing that might be a little bit misleading is the 4-year-olds that I'm showing there, the 7,661 kids. I'm stating those in terms of full-time students. So right now they receive they're funded at halftime. Of the 20,000, about 3/4 of them are 4-year-olds. So I'm assuming that, to fund them full-time, though, you only have half of them, if that makes sense. So I'm putting them in terms of a full-time equivalent. The same thing with the at-risk students who are currently funded through Head Start. Here I'm trying to get some better data on how many kids through the Head Start program are funded either half-day or full-day. I assumed here that they were funded half-day, which may be somewhat of an overstatement. I don't have good data at this point right now. Senator?
Just quick clarifying question, Todd. The 7,600 number you said that is halftime. If we have 20,000 was the number that was proffered here as the number of students in CPP. So If they were halftime, wouldn't that get us to 10,000 as the number instead of 7,600, or what am I missing there in the math?
Senator Johnston, of the 20,000 or so, about 3/4 of them are 4-year-olds. So about 15,000, it's a little bit more than that.
Oh,
Our
so the other
4-year-olds
5,000 are 3-year-olds.
Pardon?
The other 5,000 are
The
3-year-olds?
other 5-year-olds are pretty much
Gotcha.
3-year-olds.
Thank you.
So I'm just dividing that by 2 to say, if they were fully funded for a full day, we'd only be at about 7,600. So the bottom line here is that in row 8, I'm trying to show how many full-time slots would be needed for all at-risk 4-year-olds. You can see it's just under 29,000. For 3-year-olds, we would need about 26,000 halftime slots to fully fund this. So getting at those numbers and running it through the current school finance formula, the cost to provide that funding within the current framework would be about $170 million to cover all of those at-risk 4-year-olds, full day in preschool. And here I'm using 12-13, assuming that they could be plugged in the current budget year. The cost for half-day preschool for all at-risk 3-year-olds who are not currently covered either through Head Start or the current program would be about $76 million. The other thing that I added down here at the bottom is I think a lot of school districts already provide funding from local sources or from federal funds for those programs right now. So to the degree the legislature pursued this option, it may replace those funds or free those funds up for other purposes. I don't know the degree to which school districts tap into that, but I know there are some that do use other sources of revenue to pay for full-day kindergarten or for more preschool slots. So that was the first part of the question. The second question was with full-day kindergarten. What would be the cost to provide full-day kindergarten for all kindergarten students? Or Mary, do you have a question?
Before you move to full day, I just wanted to ask, on the assumptions you have on preschool, does that assume, that's just every kid is eligible, so you don't have factored in there the number of parents that don't want preschool. So like, we don't have full enrollment, we're never gonna have full enrollment of fours, let alone 3s, but you're not guessing it what that discount looks like.
No, this is taking sort of the total population of
Okay.
3 and 4-year-olds who would qualify for free and reduced lunch and meet one of these other family risk factors. So it's, I guess I would view it as sort of an aggregate number,
Thanks.
if that makes sense. Other questions?
How much of this is grant funded versus general funded?
I mean, I think this is just trying to identify what the cost to the state would be.
Is the whole $60 million general fund?
Oh, for right now in the
Yeah.
folks? That's a mix of state and local funds.
Yeah,
that
but
go towards
it's all
that.
general, I mean, it's not grant.
No, I don't think, it's coming from the state part would come from general fund, state ed fund.
Top part of CPP was grant dollars.
No, I think that's all funded through the school finance formula, so it's coming from a mixture of state and local sources, just like the funding that all of the school districts get, it's a combination.
It also does not assume any of the capital costs that would have to be borne out by the school districts to house that many new students.
That's a good point. That does not include any additional capital facilities.
Could you repeat what you said?
The question was, does this include any capital costs to serve these students? And it does not. This is just looking at the operational costs within the current formula to pay for these preschool slots, but I guess it assumes that there are facilities available to house those kids.
But even at the average of $3,300 per pupil with a mandate of 16 kids per classroom, that doesn't even cover the operational costs. So districts are still eating the difference beyond what the current funding allows. So this is assuming we would fund at the same proportion that we're currently funding, not the full cost of the program.
this is assuming if we were to add these slots within the current school finance framework, and I guess I should add that it's based on the same negative factor that exists now. So it's the formula, you'll run through, okay, this is how much it would cost under the school finance formula without the negative factor. And then this is saying, well, if we were to apply the same 16%, then this is the cost. It's almost, to some degree, it's sort of, well, what the cost is what the legislature will provide.
Good humor, Bruce.
I didn't know that was funny.
I may be confusing this with the special ed component, but is it the CPP program that we're limited both on class size and the requirement to have not only a teacher but an aide in every classroom? Am I confusing that?
Yes, are you asking about the staffing requirements?
Yeah, the requirements for providing the program. 2 adults, and there's a class size max, right? 16, right? Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
I'm assuming that the funding that would cover that, but I'm not sure if that.
I think that's the laughter. Stipulate that.
I think in case there's a series of those points to be made, we've noted in a number of previous sessions, there's a big difference between what an ideal program would cost, and I think the assumptions that we're hearing from Todd, which is just really an extrapolation from current numbers. So those who feel like the current numbers are woefully inadequate, obviously estimates of the future numbers will carry that with it. And so you can make up your own mind about where you think that is on it, but for the numbers that Todd ran, he's using current assumptions, and that we can just factor in as we talk about future revenue, how much you need to adjust these estimates to take that into account.
I think at some point it is worth thinking about the private sector and the infrastructure that we have for early care and education in Colorado. Currently, about 86% of the care is in the private sector, faith-based, for-profit, nonprofit. And this gives us an opportunity to leverage that, especially when you're talking about capital. Secondly, I would like us to look at child care subsidy dollars and how those might be leveraged with this. The reality is right now that 16% that Nan said of the kids, the CPP slots that are in the community, those community-based programs are doing an amazing job blending and braiding funding from multiple sources to create that kind of care for kids. So I think that's something to consider, and perhaps something we can actually be forward thinking about in Colorado is how to leverage that private infrastructure.
Turning then, we'll move on to the question about how much would it cost to provide full-day kindergarten. Just a little bit of information on the current level of funding that exists. Initially, the School Finance Act funded the kindergartners just like the preschool program at half-time or at 0.5 FTE. That changed a little bit later on. I'll get to that in a second. In 1995, I think it's probably also worthwhile to point out that the legislature authorized another pilot program for full-day kindergarten and allowed districts to use some of the CPP slots to pay for full-day kindergarten. Initially, it was set at 150, and then it increased over time so that it was, I think at its maximum, it was 15% of the CPP slots could be used for full-day kindergarten. So it was just under 2,500. Again, this is another graphic of how that, the use of the CPP slots for full-day kindergarten changed over that period of time. This provision in state law ended in fiscal year 07-08. And in its place, the legislature provided supplemental kindergarten funding equal to 0.08 of an FTE. So now kindergartners are now funded at 0.58 of an FTE. The 0.08, well, I'll get to that in a second. At the time that this change was made, I guess one other point, the very last bullet at the bottom, the legislature provided hold harmless funding for those school districts that were using some of the CPP slots for full-day kindergarten. So the districts that were using those CPP slots for the 2,500 kids get about $7 million in hold harmless funding in the current fiscal year. So then what would it cost to expand full-day kindergarten? The School Finance Act is currently paying 0.58 or 58% of them. So we're essentially need to take that to 1. So we need to get another 0.42 of an FTE within the current school finance framework. I estimated the cost of the 0.08 is about $32 million. Again, that's after the negative factor. So the cost to provide full-day kindergarten for the remaining kindergarten students, or the remaining 0.42, would be about $162 million. Again, that's within the current school finance framework. At that point as well, the legislature wouldn't need to hold harmless funding because they're already providing full-day kindergarten funding. So I subtract, it's closer to $170 million, but I subtracted the $7 million because you would no longer need that. They're already paying for it. And like the preschool program, again, I put the same point at the bottom here. I think a lot of school districts are already providing full-day kindergarten through other local sources, or through private tuition, or through grants, or through federal dollars. So I think that is the end.
Sure. Question and microphone, sorry. You'll probably get the question.
One clarification question. The kindergarten amount, I assume, is a lot higher because there's no risk factor involved in there, so it's all 5-year-old kids in the state, is that correct? That dollar amount is significantly higher than to cover the 4-year-olds, so my assumption is that it's because there are no children who would not be eligible for kindergarten.
The kindergarten, that covers full-day kindergarten for the whole pool.
Right, of 5-year-olds.
Not just the at-risk kids,
right,
but
okay,
all
okay.
of the...
So that was the clarification. The other comment that I would like to make is that I think it's critical as we look at moving forward, and how can we possibly move forward with covering 4-year-olds and covering 3-year-olds, is to work into these calculations one way or another, if nothing else, using the data that CDE already has to look at the potential cost savings on the back end. So we just saw data up on the screen around children who have been in CPP and how much better they're doing at 3rd grade, 5th grade, and above, and the lower rates of retention and things like that. So I would really love to see the day where we work into calculations like this, that yes, there is a cost initially to do it, but how much might that perhaps be mitigated in the long run by not having as many kids repeat 3rd grade, for example, and that kind of thing.
Thanks. That's a good point.
The other thing I would just like to piggyback on Charlotte's comment, and actually Sue's as well, is the blending and the braiding of funds. There are a lot of resources the state currently uses for child care subsidies that can certainly be used to support this. I would also encourage Colorado to not go too far with trying to, you have a good program here, let's don't try to make the dollars meet the need. In other words, we know that the impact on children, especially those children that are most at risk, really serves us well later. So I would encourage you to keep the standards high and not try to dilute it down in order to meet every, that tends to be my experience is that's what happens. We're like, we got to get here, so let's start adding water to a lot of things. So I would encourage you not to do that and to really look at opportunities that, resources that you may be currently using for remediation. I know that Title I's a local LEA decision, but that is certainly an allowable thing to use on children that are younger. So would it be a better investment to invest those dollars early so you don't have to use the remediation in summer school and after school? So I think there's a great opportunity, there's a good foundation here, but to be careful that we don't end up undoing the good that has been done so far. And I would really, really stand on the ground that this is a good investment and it will save us money in the long run. I know that's very hard to feel good about right now because you're experiencing so much pain with the other cuts, but it's kind of like, pay now or pay later, and this would be a really smart move at this point in the juncture because there are so few dollars for the other programs. So I would encourage us to really think very strategically and kind of outside the box on this so that we can get these children on the right track, because typically when they start behind, they not only stay behind, but they usually even lose more ground. So there's a great opportunity here, and I hope we'll really think hard about the ways to do it, not that we can't do it.
Just a little bit of additional context for how the .58 came about. This was about the time that Governor Bill Ritter put in place the mill levy stabilization, and this was intended to be the first year of additional kindergarten funding that would go toward full-day K, real full-day K, 1.0. And so the plan was it was going to be .58 the first year, .65 the second year, .73 the third year, and on like that until it was that fully funded level, but it never quite happened. So it happened at the same time that the economy crashed, and I think obviously we've seen what happened as a result of that.
Thanks, Bruce.
Todd, I'm not real clear at this point when I know how many preschool slots we have for 4-year-olds. You said it was about 20,000. How many at-risk 4-year-olds are there out there that are not being served at all for half-day preschool services? That's the number I'm trying to figure out.
What I was trying to get at through that table was at the bottom, sort of the number of at-risk 4-year-olds who would be in need of full-day preschool. So I'd have to tweak that number because I think there's the one row.
I just want to know half day. You know, that's where we haven't even.
I could probably get.
To our first goal of providing half day preschool for every at-risk 4-year-old. How short are we at this point?
Just our rough, our rough estimates that were in the 2012 Colorado Preschool Program Legislative Report reflects 7,879 as a rough estimate of those children, sort of the unmet need, those children who would be eligible but not yet served.
Could you say that again so we could hear it?
Sorry.
Sorry, thanks, Bruce.
The CPP 2012 legislative report reflects an estimate of 7,879 children who were CPP eligible but could not be served due to lack of slots.
Just 4-year-olds?
Just 4-year-olds.
Yeah, and those are the ones that showed up at the door though, right? So that's kind of an underestimate.
It's a combination of documentation of current waiting lists and the annual report that school districts file with us. Yes, so yes.
Right. So I just had a couple of comments, and I kind of wanted to link a couple of things together. And again, I'm Jennifer Landrum with the Children's Campaign, the VP of Early Childhood Initiatives. The first comment I wanted to make is back to our earlier conversation about weight. And I think your comment about the fact that half the PPR doesn't cover the cost leads me to really start thinking about, do we need to wait for early childhood and full day K in general? So that was just one comment in reply to that. The second thing I wanted to link again was what I talked about last time we were together, which is early intervention. And the fact that Nan gave you quite a bit of evidence on what this does for CSAP results, for reducing retention, et cetera. But the earlier we intervene, it also reduces special education. And so I think that finding our at-risk children earlier makes a lot of sense, and it pays off down the line. The third thing I wanted to say, which we didn't talk about at all, is quality standards around full-day kindergarten. You know, full-day kindergarten is not equal. If you have a classroom of 30 kids, 35 kids, even 25 kids, most of them at risk, with only one teacher, you are not going to get good result from full-day K. And we know this from research. And back in, I think it was 2008, in the CPP legislature report, there was this great study done on full-day K in Pueblo, Colorado, where they had one group of kids in full-day kindergarten classrooms with no quality standards. And I'm talking there about class size, 2 teachers in a classroom, developmentally appropriate curriculum, all the things that we know are great for kids. What we saw, and then we had a group of kids that were in classrooms with quality standards. So let me read you the results very quickly. In one elementary school, in the classrooms without quality standards, 47% of kindergartners met benchmarks. In that same elementary school where we had those quality standards, 79.1% met benchmarks at the end of the year. If we look at another elementary school, 77% in the classroom without quality standards met benchmarks. In the one with quality standards, 93.6% met benchmarks. And that report is available online. So basically what I'm saying is, let's connect it. Let's connect early childhood to great results we want to see for all our kids. Let's think about a weight. And third, when we consider full-day kindergarten, I think we cannot consider it without looking at what quality standards should be for those kids, particularly in classrooms that have a high percentage of at-risk students. Thanks.
And our fact-checking team was working during that comment to revise the number that I think we just heard.
Thank you, and this goes back to Senator Wendell's question about how many 4-year-olds are currently not being served. And if you factor in not only the free and reduced lunch students, but also the ones with other factors, like the students from families with drug abuse or something like that, then we're closer to about 14,000.
Real-time data improvement. Thanks so much. All right. Coming and then, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mary, and then we'll get one last comment. I think we are going to need to take a break here.
Somebody handed this to me, so. To go back to Charlotte's point about the return on investment, I think it's really important to think about this because although there's been tons of work done on the academic achievement return on investment and a lot of work done on the fiscal return on investment, people tend to see those returns as really long-term returns, but the fact of the matter is there are enough short-term returns on investment in preschool to fully pay for itself. And so there are lots of states that are exploring innovative ways to securitize, essentially, in the short time period, not longer than 10 years, those savings and capture them in order to pay for upfront programming. And I just throw it out there as something that we might consider as part of a solution here.
I have a couple thoughts rambling around in my head, and one of the things I'm thinking about is we talked about, based on the presentation, the key strategies around a program like this, and it sounds somewhat like we're talking about this is what a good quality program looks like, but at the same time, what we're talking about as far as the cost of this for the state is ratcheting the CPP or the kindergarten up to what our normal PPR is. And I don't know about the other districts in the room. I venture to say you're all in the same boat. We'd be hard pressed to have 16 children per classroom, 2 adults per classroom, with just the PPR that we're getting here. So I think we're approaching this at 2 different angles maybe, and that's concerning a little bit.
All right, we'll take that as the last comment, so you can get a break and we'll return. But just to note, I think your comments and the presentations from Todd and from Nan and from Melissa really deepened. Even if we just try to take a numerical estimate of the cost star, you've really shown the complexity and the depth towards getting a handle on what those really are, so which would drive it up in some ways. And a number of you brought other factors that would help reduce those costs, public-private partnerships, cost savings over time. So rich discussion. Thanks again to our presenters. And let's take didn't mean to step on your applause line there. So just a quick kind of framing of where we are. We wanted to have this background knowledge, partly because we wanted you to have an understanding of these variables to, at the end of today's session, really think through, if you're going to increase the revenue, as we've said we've committed to doing, where would you prioritize it? Where do you see that going? We'll have one more short presentation on the innovation part of the recommendations from the School Finance Partnership from Charlotte Chancho and Mapleton before we dive into the revenue. So come back, let's take a 10-minute break. It's about 3:53 by my watch. We'll start at 4:03. All right, we'll